Today's session for this Wednesday's webinar is on the Vision for State Vocational Rehabilitation Services. Doug Morton will be our presenter on that. We will also have Lisa Jones speaking on the coordination of services between VR and the workforce system. As always with these webinars, we will be muting individuals that have some background noise. Doug has asked that we hold all questions during his presentation until he is through, rather than have an open discussion. So until Doug is done, please mute your phones. Chelsea's provided the instructions on how to do that in the chat pod. The documents that we're using today, you can see from the file download pod on the bottom left of your screen. The RSA Vision is the PowerPoint, and the TAC technical assistance document is the information that Doug will be presenting from the majority of his presentation. I'll turn it over to Lisa Jones for some introductory statements, and then we'll go to Doug. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. This is going to be a series of webinars over the next few weeks that highlight our partner programs and their role in the workforce system. I think it's important to note, as we all know, this, WIOA was a game changer for us, and there is certainly increased coordination of services to our customers more so than ever before. So we wanted to kick off with the VR program, and I also think it's, just at the national level, it's very telling that as they're issuing their individual guidances, particularly for the four core programs, each of those guidances, are very much aligned with what we're doing under Title I. So there's a high expectation that we are coordinating services, and we're making sure that we're integrated in our delivery at the one stop. So I think also too, and I'll re-mention this at the end, as we go through just the vision for Voc Rehab, be thinking about, as a follow-up, are there specific types of cross-trainings that we need to do, like eligibility or some other type of service delivery, like what types of, like VR does customized training. So just kind of keep in the back of your mind if there's any specific training that we need to do going forward. We will also be doing a similar presentation for adult ed and the Community Services Block Grant Program, which is the community action agencies. We'd also like to do possibly TANF and some of the other one-stop partner programs, but I want to leave those up to you for you to tell us what kinds of things you want to hear about. And if you want to hear about all 16, we'll do all 16. But those, I think, are the ones that are the most detailed in their service delivery and the more in-depth eligibility requirements. So with that said, I'd like to welcome Doug Morton from the Department of Human Services Vocational Rehabilitation Program, and he's going to just do a brief overview of the vision for VR in the one-stop system. So Doug, take it away.
All right, thanks very much, Lisa. Just a little technical question here. I don't know if I can make this PowerPoint move.
You should be able to. I made you a presenter. If it's not working, let me make you a host. That definitely would work. You just use the arrows at the bottom of the PowerPoint.
Okay, I think I can see it now. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to say that I have learned quite a bit attending several of these Wednesday webinars. We've had, last week, Lisa and also Matt Helen came out to some of our regional meetings. We had about 650 of our staff from around the state got together in 3 different meetings, and among the things we talked about was WIOA and how we hope to be a real partner in this, and how the WIA experience didn't really take, at least on the VR side. So one of the things that we talked about was this document that came out from our federal partner, which is the Rehabilitation Services Administration, or RSA. They put out Technical Assistance Circular 1502, or a TAC that's very similar to what you folks have as a a TEAGL. It's guidance from our federal partner, and it's just called Vision for the State Vocational Rehabilitation Services Program as a partner in the Workforce Development System under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or just the Vision document. Before we go too far with that, I just want to tell you a little bit about what our agency does, if any of you are not familiar with us. The Vocational Rehabilitation Program has been around almost 100 years as a state-federal partnership. We get from the federal government about $100 million every year. Our total program budget is about $140 million. We have 44 field offices around the state. We have about 245 vocational rehabilitation counselors if we're ever fully staffed, which of course is almost never. In the last fiscal year, we served about 42,000 people. About 29,000 people on any given morning will have an open case on our caseload. And that gives you kind of the scope of, what we do and who we are. In the last fiscal year, we had 5,442 individuals achieved a competitive employment outcome, which means that they worked at least 90 days in a job that paid them at least the minimum wage, and that they got the same pay and benefits as their coworkers that don't have disabilities. Under WIOA, that phrase competitive employment is changed to competitive integrated employment for purposes of emphasis about the type of settings people should be working in. In terms of who we work with, we do a lot of work with kids in high school. Last year we had about 10,000 and some individuals who were receiving VR services while they were in high school. About 53% of all our new cases are opened when the person is less than 21 years old. We provide a lot of training for people. We had, and the numbers you're seeing here, if you're seeing them, are that we had 1,517 people as of yesterday enrolled in university training programs with us, and we had another 1,661 that were in some type of community college program. And I should note that that includes programs that are degree-based programs as well as credential programs, non-degree programs for people in community college. About a third of the individuals we serve are people who receive supplemental security income or Social Security disability insurance payments because of the nature of their disability. About 1,100 people every year participate in our supported employment program. And about half, roughly 49% of our customers are classified as having a most significant disability. And in case you're not familiar with our agency, we have a pretty wide range of people with different kinds of disabilities that we serve. We have, we always break out the visual and hearing impairments because we have separate program organizations that work with them, but that's about, each of those is about 7% of our total population. The people that have problems with physical movement, mobility, and so on are about 8%. Mental illness is about 11%. Intellectual disability is about 14%, and that includes people with autism. Traditionally, that category was pretty small, and it's getting bigger, so when we start doing our standard reports, we're going to break those out separately. The big category is learning disability, and this is the biggest chunk of kids that we work with while they're still in high school. So they're a pretty broad range of things. And then all other impairments are about 23%. So just to give you a bit of a picture. In terms of eligibility for the program, the basic eligibility statement is that you have to have a physical or mental impairment that limits your ability to work. In terms of receiving services from our agency, we evaluate each individual based on 7 different areas of functioning. So mobility, communication, interpersonal skills, self-care, self-direction, work skills, work tolerance, and you must be rated as having a serious limitation on at least one of these 7 areas in order to receive services from our agency. In general, the categories that we work with are significant disability. A very significant disability means you have a serious limitation in 2 of these 7 areas, and a most significant disability means you have a serious limitation in 3 or more of these areas of functioning. So I'm going to pick up what I think are some of the significant parts of the vision document from our federal partners. And I've underlined a few key phrases that I think stand out as important. As is the case with the companion document, the TEGO from Department of Labor that lays out a vision, it's trying to walk a line between being a pretty clear expression of expectations and being a little pie in the sky, if you will. I think they do a pretty good job of staying on the right side of the line there, if you will. Of course, we know that WIOA is designed to foster opportunities for innovation and creating new opportunities for people to work together, and there's only so many ways you can say that without repeating yourself. It specifies that the purpose of the Rehab Act is to assist people with disabilities, and then they emphasize including youth and students with disabilities to succeed in the competitive labor market. They've made a big decision. There were always some loopholes in our system for allowing various sorts of outcomes that didn't include competitive employment, and those are being closed off with WIOA. So we are exclusively focusing on competitive integrated employment for people with disabilities. The message from our federal partner is that we need to work effectively with the other elements of the workforce system, specifically serving workers with disabilities, providing with necessary services and support so they can acquire skills and credentials that they need to have the opportunity to pursue in-demand jobs and careers. And again, skills and credentials is a term that wasn't really featured in our Rehab Act terminology much anymore. The VR program does a lot besides skill training. We work at helping people adapt to their disability. We provide assistive technology. We occasionally do things like surgeries and other medical treatment to assist people with disabling conditions that can be remedied in some way or ameliorated. But this is a much bigger emphasis on skill training and achievement of credentials in line with the rest of the WIOA system. And of course, with the in-demand jobs, the high-growth jobs, all of that logic is something that is new to the VR program. It's not something that we have focused on. We haven't spoken that language before. And the final point on this is that they want, our federal agency is telling us we need to be leaders in the one-stop system. And one phrase that we haven't seen very much of in our world, which I think is welcome, is that they want to make sure that we can build a strong middle class. We want to see that people with disabilities are getting better jobs and are earning more money than perhaps some of the lower expectations that have existed in the past. And we're really hoping that participation with the other elements of the workforce system will create some opportunities for people to move up in the economic ladder a bit. One of the phrases that gets repeated a lot in this guidance document from our federal partners is that we need to work with people with the most significant disabilities, and even those individuals are capable of achieving competitive integrated employment. I don't know if any of the folks on the call are familiar with the Illinois Employment First Act or Employment First as a national movement, but this is something that's been going on for the last perhaps 8 or 10 years, which is putting the language of competitive integrated employment out there as something that's significant as the primary objective for serving people with disabilities. And it's sort of a parallel movement, if you will, to what's going on with WIOA. In terms of the unified plan, most of the people on the call are familiar with the general scope of what that is all about. The requirements, we've for many years had a requirement to do our own state VR plan. That requirement was eliminated by WIOA, and now we have a separate portion of the unified plan that we're responsible for as an agency. And of course, we are, the expectation is that we will be full partners in development of that unified plan and helping people with disabilities obtain jobs in high-demand fields. And once again, in the Unified Strategic Planning and Goals, they want to make sure that our agency takes responsibility for making sure that people with most significant disabilities are addressed in that planning process. The guidance document for VR is emphasizing quite a bit about performance, which I know a lot of us have talked about already in these various webinars and other settings, but this is a big change for us because we had an entire series of performance standards and indicators that were abolished by the passage of WIOA, and so we are moving over to a different system, and so everyone needs to sort of wrap their heads around where that is all going and how it ties us in with the rest of the workforce system. And yes, they make some good arguments that, you know, this will help tie everyone closer together, and we can certainly hope that that's the case. One of the things that we also need to kind of get our staff being able to think about is just some of the terminology like program exit. We will probably still use the term case closure because that's what comes natural to us. But when someone becomes employed and they can achieve employment and keep it for 90 days, then that's what we would call a successful closure. It's also the point at which they're counted as exiting the program. And by the way, we did a little test measurement. We looked at people who we could get 4 quarters of wage data on, and for that batch of individuals, which I think was about 3,000 or so, we had 6 months. At 6 months, 49% of those people still were reporting earnings, and at 12 months, 46% of those people were reporting earnings. And I have no idea how that compares to what the rest of the workforce system does, but that's the baseline that we've been able to establish. The document goes in a bit of detail, trying to make sure that the VR agencies understand that we will be a partner in the one-stop system. We will not just think of it as that place on the other side of town that maybe we visit once in a while. Again, they emphasize the importance of helping people obtain middle-class earnings, family-sustaining wages, that type of employment target, which I think is very good for the VR program to set their expectations a bit higher than I believe we've set them in the past. Also emphasizes the importance of working with employers to help identify and recruit and hire skilled workers. One of the key elements on the document is this third dot point here, which is, as a core partner in the one-stop system, VR agencies can use their expertise to ensure that individuals with disabilities get the services they need through the VR program, as well as other programs in the one-stop system to prepare for and obtain competitive integrated employment. And that's really going to be a key item for us moving forward. How do we assist individuals who have disabilities, make sure that they have access to services through other elements of the workforce system besides the VR program. The document goes into a bit of detail on services to employers, and I will tell you right now that this is not something that we have been particularly good at on our side. We have done a number of different things over the years. We have a few staff who are dedicated to this role, business services, employer services, but it is not something that we really have emphasized to the degree that WIOA has expectations for us, and at some point there will be measurable standards for how they're going to look at our performance. But the document just says we VR agencies can play a critical role in working with employers interested in hiring qualified individuals with disabilities. We want to make sure that people with disabilities are provided a full range of services to engage in job-driven training and pursue high-quality employment outcomes. WIOA enables VR agencies to provide needed training and technical assistances to services to employers hiring or interested in hiring people with disabilities. And this is something on our side that we really need to do a lot of thinking about, because it's not just relating to employers and representing individual candidates for jobs, or it's more how can we be a force for representing people with disabilities in general as a resource for employers. And another thing that will be very different for us is this notion of work-based learning experiences. We do quite a bit of that with the high school kids that we work with. I mentioned earlier, we have a good chunk of our service population are young people who are still in school, and we do a variety of work-based learning experiences with them, culminating before they leave school, hopefully in a job that's a full community paid job at or above the minimum wage that you know, is a valuable work experience for them. But we have other, you know, subsidized or, you know, more learning type experiences for them. It is not something that we have done extensively with adult customers, or, if you will, the sort of out-of-school youth, people who are no longer in school but still meet the definition of youth for us, which I believe is the same as for everyone else going up to age 25. And again, for us, in our guidance, we're being told 5 different ways that we really need to make sure that we're serving youth with disabilities, and we're providing them with opportunities to make the transition from school to work. Again, they emphasize youth with the most significant disabilities. They're expecting us as VR agencies to coordinate delivery of services to youth with disabilities for a variety of provider structures around the state. And then we're expected to work with the state and local education authorities to make sure that there's a system of transition services for youth. One term that's not really in this document is pre-employment transition services, which is a new category for us. It incorporates quite a range of different activities, but WIOA expects that all youth with disabilities, while they're in school, will receive pre-employment transition services. Well, as I indicated earlier, we serve about 11,000 individuals in that category every year. In Illinois, in that age category, there are somewhere between 95 and 100,000 students with IEPs who are now required to receive some form of pre-employment transition services. We will be working with the State Board of Education to reach a formal written agreement before the WIOA plan goes in March. But right now, we don't have an understanding with them as to how we're going to reach a division of labor, if you will, on making those things happen. One of the things that will be different for us, and I don't know if how this relates to any of the work that other workforce partners are engaged in, is that we've worked pretty much just with individual customers while they're in school. They've been determined eligible for our program, and we've written a plan of services for them. WIOA allows us to work with groups of youth with disabilities who have not necessarily been determined eligible for our program. So the nature of what those services would be like, and obviously we would need to do larger groups of people if we're going to come anywhere near serving that 95 to 100,000 number of people. So how that's going to happen is something that we really don't know right now, and we're scratching our heads and doing our best to figure that one In the guidance document, and I think it was similar with what the document that came out on the Department of Labor side, it said, well, let's think of things that you should be doing right now. We understand that there are formal regulations that aren't quite finished yet, but don't sit here waiting for that to happen. So they're expecting us to look at ways we can expand our services to youth with disabilities, make sure that we're working on our formal interagency agreements, which we are, looking at our policies and procedures for coordinating with local education agencies, developing or strengthening coordination of services to out-of-school youth. I've underlined that because that's a term that we have not typically used in the VR program, and I know it plays a big part in what the one-stop system is being expected to do going forward. So I'm sure we'll have many opportunities to talk about that. They want us to make sure we revise and adjust our public materials, our public-facing stuff. We can certainly do that, look at best practices, and so on and so forth. One of the things we're being encouraged to do is to strengthen and perhaps revive some of our relationships with some of the local workforce boards. And for the most part, I would say our relationships are pretty good. We've been emailing and communicating with all of our supervisors since our meeting yesterday with the statewide team, and we've pretty much only found one or maybe two areas where we think we have a problem. Otherwise, we have one of our field office supervisors assigned to all of the local boards, and those things seem to be going fairly well. Obviously, to the extent that they can assist us in looking at expanding work-based learning opportunities, including internships and apprenticeships, that would be terrific because we believe that you folks have much more experience in that than we do. One of the issues that they bring up is the notion of standing committees. I know that there were some changes relative to WIOA requirements in those committee structures. To the extent that we can be a resource and participate in or lead a standing committee on services to people with disabilities, I think that's an excellent opportunity for us to have a role, and I'd be interested in hearing what some of the workforce people would think about that. One of the things that is being suggested, and this is something that we have played a part in the past, is trying to make sure that one-stop locations are physically and programmatically accessible to people with disabilities. One of the ways that I was involved with WIOA when it first started was assisting in getting some assistive technology purchased and distributed to different centers around the state. And that stuff's all hit the junk pile quite a long time ago. But we have some very strong resources in the area of access technology that I would encourage anyone on the call that wants information about that to let us know, because we can certainly be of assistance there. In terms of any of the physical accessibility stuff, I'm not aware that that is that much of a problem, but between our staff and the people we work with in the independent living centers around the state, we can definitely be a resource for folks there. To summarize the guidance that we're getting, we need to work together with everybody. The list is way too long to specify in one slide. There's a major expectation that we need to do more in terms of working with students and youth with disabilities. We like to think that we have done a pretty good job. About a year and a half ago, RSA held a national webinar and picked examples from 3 states on transition programs that they thought were doing a pretty good job, and one was our Illinois high school program. But nonetheless, we will do better. We need to start building relationships with employers. We recently applied for a technical assistance grant, and we're, I think, pretty close to getting the final approval for that. There's a national organization located in Boston that has a contract with RSA, and we're hoping that they will come out and assist us in developing what we're calling a business relations strategy. We're not going to be hiring like 20 or 30 new staff for that role, so we want to try to get some better capabilities for our staff to be able to do the type of services to employers that needs to be done under WIOA. So we have our fingers crossed on that one. And they certainly want us to take steps to be a full partner in the one-stop system. So if any of you folks out there in the workforce world think that your local VR agency isn't, doing the heavy lifting that they should be doing, please tell somebody higher up in our organization. We'd appreciate it. And for my last thought, this is just some of my personal observations on how things are going and where we are with all of this. It's great that we're having some formal guidance from our federal funders and that it's coming in a coordinated fashion with what's coming to everyone else from the Department of Labor side, so that's a very positive move. We know that on our side we need to get staff training going at a higher level in order that our staff have a better understanding of how other workforce programs go. I know from a little bit of our discussion we had last week that our counselors are really very uninformed about eligibility criteria for Title I programs, and that's something we obviously need to improve. To the extent that we can do joint training with our staff and workforce staff, I think that has a lot of opportunities for us and for everyone in the system. Given the specific requirements for us in VR and for the Title I folks in working with out-of-school youth, I think that services to young people is going to be a natural focal point for us on the VR side and folks on the workforce side to have a conversation about how we can both serve a pretty large group of people who have some pretty significant needs. I already mentioned that we have some resources to offer in terms of accessible technology. I know that we also have a lot to learn about the data and information that's available on your side, and I'm sure we will have various opportunities to discuss about that. But in my opinion, we are still in a learning mode. We need to keep our ears open and hopefully within the next year be able to have a much deeper understanding than we have had in the past. We did, I think, our best to kind of dodge a bullet on when WIOA was first enacted. I don't know how many of you have been around for that length of time, but it seemed as if quite a lot of things were going to happen that did not happen. So this time, I think we have a new incentive to make it a success for everybody. So that's what I was prepared to talk about today. I don't know who has questions or...
Hi, Doug. It's Lisa. I just want to point out a couple of things before we take questions, but I think just a general statement is throughout your presentation, I think we can see lots of opportunities where we either need to improve or begin working together, and certainly the out-of-school youth is a major one, particularly with our requirement to spend 75% of our youth funds on that population. Also, just to follow up and reiterate what you said about you all being a resource, the local boards have a greater role or now the responsibility for making sure our centers are physically and programmatically accessible, so I would definitely encourage all local areas to reach out to your staff in that capacity. And I think, too, just, one of the things I totally agree we need to start thinking about some cross-training between our staff within the WIOA TEGL or the one-stop vision. It's very clear that they're looking at integration of services and that at a very basic level, case managers, whether they're career planners through the Title I-B program or they're VR counselors, there needs to be some awareness of what your eligibility requirements are and what types of services are available. So I think, I really appreciate you doing this and the kind of a crosswalk of what we need to be working on. So I think if you are ready, we'd love to take questions for Doug. And also, Mark's going to post a poll to ask everyone what other types of webinar topics they want to hear. And you can also, if you want specific eligibility, cross-training, a crosswalk, or a crosswalk of career services, as I said earlier, please make sure you mention that as well. So, Chelsea, if you could unmute everybody, that would be great.
Yeah, Doug, we've got a first question about, have there been any discussions with regard to VR staff being located in the one-stop centers going forward?
We've had quite a lot of discussion about that, although Lisa knows that they distributed a document yesterday which shows that in quite a lot of the centers there's no room to put anybody, so we'll have to puzzle that one out. We are looking at all opportunities where it's possible to actually move our whole office to the same location or next door to somebody. We move offices all the time. You know, we've moved in the last 10 years a lot of our offices into locations that are adjacent to other parts of the Department of Human Services. But in terms of there's a lot of reasons why for WIOA we would like to be located in or near one-stops. The physical possibility of that we don't know. In terms of how we can locate one or two staff in a given location, that seems more likely in the short term. But it's going to be a while before we have a clear plan on how that's going to go. It's going to be center by center and how that relates to our current locations. We know that, for example, Labor Relations tells us that we can assign a person to report for duty at a one-stop office that's in the same town, and we don't have to do anything special to make that happen. If we want a person to be assigned to work in a different county, that is potentially more of a problem for us. So there's a lot of complexities there, but we are looking at every way we can possibly put a person there in a one-stop, not on like Tuesday and Thursday afternoons from 3 to 4, but on a full-time basis. So stay tuned on that one.
And Doug, should they contact you if they want to discuss co-location?
Sure, that would be fine, yeah.
Can you type your email address in the chat pod since it was not on the presentation so that they have that to contact you?
Okay, I will do that right now.
In regards to the excellent comments with us providing the cooperation from VR on this presentation, as Lisa said, I'll be posting a poll of other agency partners and programs that everyone can address as those that they want addressed, I should say. But all along we've been providing these from a workforce standpoint, not ignoring that those other partners are part of the whole picture, but we wanted to get some of the things from our standpoint out of the way first. And so you'll see that a lot of the upcoming webinars will be the coordination of other programs and integrated with information on how that will work with the workforce system, which is what we are familiar with, which is what most of these webinars have addressed up to this point in time. So while we took a couple weeks break leading into today, we think we've got a pretty full schedule for the next several weeks, as long as we can get those webinars organized with those partners. But we do have some other information we can share on the workforce side if we get to a point where we don't have a coordinated date for one of the programs. So, you know, please be looking forward to that information as we go along here in the next few weeks.
No, they can't. No, not till next.
Oh, who's that? Use that person. Okay, you're going to ask my
Okay, Mike's asking what type of individual service strategy or employment plan do you currently use for your career services? I assume you're asking that from a VR standpoint, Mike?
Yes, yes.
Yes, because, you know, ours is still in development, right? So I just wondered, you know, what kind they use, and is it something that maybe we could use? There hasn't been an official ISS.
Right, and I'll let Doug speak to that, but one thing I do want to say is that we're actually getting ready to convene a work group with Jeannie Kitchen's team around developing a more universal employment plan. So, definitely we would want Doug and, some of his team to participate in that. But do you want to talk a little bit more, Doug, about what your IEPs look like or your ISSs, what types of information they include?
Well, it seems there's only a few initials to go around. We have what's called an IPE, Individualized Plan for Employment, and that is a pretty detailed document that lays out all the services that the individual is going to need, and lays out what their employment goal is and the length of time we think it's going to take that individual to achieve the outcome. In general, the plan is good for only 1 year. If the person's in a longer training program or they have difficulty getting employed, we need to adjust the program when needed, or at least every year. I can certainly send a copy of it. I mean, there's a lot of structure to it that's specific to regulations that we have. If there's any components or ideas in there, people are certainly welcome to borrow those and lift what they like.
And that would be great, because what we can do is post that with the webinar information, because we always post the recording once we finish and any materials that we hand out. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, that would be great. And then there's another question about a universal ISS. I'm not sure that we're really prepared to say that, but certainly as we move forward, we want to start looking at more ways to coordinate intake and plans. But we're probably still quite a ways off from that.
I think that would be a long-term sort of thing.
Yes, exactly. I agree. I also think, too, as we're moving forward, and some of you have heard me say this before, but I think really we need to look at different strategies that each of our programs use. I know from our grants that we've had, the Disability Employment Initiative, one of the strategies that we use is called an integrated resource team. And that is a really good model that pulls together various partners around the services a customer needs. And through that process, a plan is developed to address supportive services, address training needs, address accommodations or other types of services and activities, particularly training towards employment, various career services. So while we may not say it's an integrated resource team, going forward, that's certainly a model that we can look at as we move forward in WIOA implementation around service integration. So just, I throw that out there just as food for thought as you're working with your partners in designing strategies. Doug, is there anything you want to say beyond what I just said, or?
No, we work, like I indicated earlier, with people with a variety of disabilities, a lot of different service providers that we use. We certainly are open to talking about that team concept. It's not that unusual for us to work with various other team concepts with people, and some of our services to folks with mental health are very heavily into that concept. So I think it's a situation where let's find an opportunity to sit down and talk about particular individuals and say, hey, let's work on this individual and see how these concepts work in this, and go from there. And then folks on our side and folks on the workforce side will have that experience to build on. We had an individual who spoke up at one of our meetings last week about a sort of a strategy he developed in his area downstate to work with youth with disabilities who seem to be having some problem deciding about moving forward with employment. And he's provided me with some details on that, and that's just an example of how you need to sit down and talk and listen and experiment a bit to see what we can work out. If all of the 40-some offices we have and all of the one-stops that are in the system find a way to sit down and work with, a handful of people each in the next, let's say 6 or 8 months, we're going to know a lot more by the end of this fiscal year than we do now about ways to make connections.
Absolutely.
Because you're going to know more from that than from people sitting down in a conference room strategizing and, thinking, in abstract terms.
Absolutely, but I think to the point of your staff person that is going to share that information with you, that might be a good idea for us to ask everybody on here and, reach out to your other counterparts for best practices that are being used so that we can share those. We have another question around information or guidelines regarding workspace learning experiences. We can certainly provide those. One of the things that I will say is we're getting ready to put out from a Title I side policy around work-based learning and what's included in that. I can certainly speak to on-the-job training, where that is a situation where the workforce Title I-B side pays a portion or a reimbursement rate to an employer for a commitment to hire. That reimbursement rate can go up to 75%. While you guys have a customized employment, we have customized training, which is a 50% reimbursement rate. We can also create opportunities for work experience, which is, working with an employer to get somebody exactly that, work experience, and then we can follow that up with other models such as OJT. I think one of the things that, for those of you that are on the call that don't work with our funding every day should know that one thing that WIOA did was provide us a lot of flexibility in the way we deliver training services and the way we pay for training services. So I think that's another really good opportunity as we're sitting down and strategizing with our partners of ways that we can leverage funds. So I hope I've answered that question, but we'll certainly get more information out to you. And there's another question mark that I can't read. And
yeah,
it's for Doug.
WIOA 7 has indicated that they've been running into issues regarding testing, both the math and reading of individuals, youth with disabilities, and some of the school IEPs use tests that don't translate to what goes into IWDS, or the IEP was not required testing every year. So they're asking, do you require testing on youth with disabilities?
Well, not as a rule. We work with the individual at the level that they are, and typically when an individual we're working with is in high school still, there's a lot of information from various years the person's been in school. There's a lot of testing information on that person. We look at functional limitations that they have, and we know that school is working to some degree with them on academic skills, but we don't have any specific testing requirements or criteria that someone has to meet.
Okay, from a Title I-B standpoint, however, we do require those tests for all individuals or youth, whether they have disability or not. So, maybe that's information that can be shared with VR once it's done at our, by our staff, the Title I-B staff. But we just need to make sure when we talk coordination of services, there will be differences in what each program might require. And as Doug says, they may not require us testing, but the Title I-B still continues to require that testing.
But I think this is also an opportunity for us to look a little more closely at the regs, because I know that it says that we can use assessments or other types of tools that have currently been done, and we don't have to repeat or reinvent the wheel. So I think, that's definitely something to keep in mind around what types of assessments, because as Doug mentioned, they're doing all kinds of assessments as they're going through school. So we really need, from our standpoint, to look at our policy and what would be allowed for us when we enroll any of these kids with disabilities, to see if we can build on what's already been done. And if there isn't the flexibility within the law, which I'm hoping that there is, then, maybe that's something that we can ask for a waiver or a demonstration pilot or something to really take a look at that.
Yeah, I think that leads into the follow-up question by LWIA 7 in that, that there are other tests already done and they're included in, I don't know if you might have meant an ISS over an IEP, but either way, if they're already done and they're acceptable to the Title 1B program, then we should be able to accept that as is because it's on, it's listed in the plan and it's an acceptable testing.
And I think that this is a statement or a question specifically to VR counselors, but they're asking or inquiring or stating that they think that this process will take a little bit longer as you're looking and as we're starting more coordination with other partners. So they're asking if they would be penalized if their outcomes are lower as we're working through more integrated service strategies.
Well, I would say this. I mean, we're not looking to penalize anybody for working cooperatively with their one-stop partners. We want to encourage that. I would just say to the individual asking the question or anybody else from the VR side that's on the call, a lot of the services that we work with today take quite a bit of time.
Right.
Our typical community placement contracts, sometimes it takes quite a bit of time for a person to achieve an employment result. We know that we have a situation where there are a lot of people who are young adults or youth, however you want to look at it, who have some work experience but for whatever reason are disconnected from the workforce for whatever reason. Let's say they're 19, 20 years old. I would say to any VR person, let's look at what's available from the one-stop system for that individual before we necessarily make a referral to a community rehab program where we know that that's a relatively expensive service for us. But let's see how these things go. That would be my response.
I would like to follow up with that for the Title 1B staff. If someone has a similar question, we've discussed this in many of the webinars that because of performance implications, we're looking for all the individuals, all the barriers that they might have, and so as you identify a new barrier, the anticipation is that you would provide some service strategy that addresses that barrier, and so sure, it's going to take a little more time to address those. There's some new services available to customers under WIOA that weren't available under WIA, so going back to the performance side of it, the more barriers that we can identify, which is an indication we're providing services to those, then the local areas, the state gets a break, if you will, as the easiest way to say it, from those performance measurements. So, you need to keep that in mind is that that WIOA is designed to provide that additional assistance because they have multiple barriers, and so it will be taken into consideration in the ultimate performance by the fact that they have addressed multiple barriers.
And then there's a follow-up question from LWIA 7 around waiving reading and math tests for youth who have an IEP. I definitely think that's something that we'll look into. That is a very good suggestion, and in my mind, it makes perfect sense.
Thanks a lot. Elise, this is Amy from LWIA 7. So this has really been a big issue for our providers who specialize in youth with disabilities, because they keep getting dinged on findings, and we get, some people are even saying that it's violating some other state educational law to start requiring people to do more academic tests than are called for in the IEP. So if we can, I talk offline more about this and how we can, because I got a little revolt going on with about 4 agencies that are serving youth with disabilities over this issue.
Okay.
I went ahead and posted the poll if we've got any more questions. That's all we had in the chat pod, but if anyone wants to type more questions or just present them over the telephone while we're waiting for those last few questions. What we want you to do is check every single option here that you would like to hear more from as far as additional agency partner programs. And similar to today's webinar, we will coordinate that with Title I-B and let you know from after we hear their side of things and their requirements, how that would be integrated and coordinated with Title I-B. Some of these might be shorter topics, so we might be able to handle 2 of them within one webinar if the individual that's presenting for the program feels, they don't need as much time. So as you'll see, we're seeing a lot of people check several of these. We could definitely have a full plate of webinars scheduled just on agency partner programs over the next 2 or 3 months, in addition to what we want to do as we continue on with Title I-B and maybe add additional items from the Department of Commerce perspective. So go ahead and complete those with those that you would really like to hear from as part of a webinar in the same manner as we've handled today. So if anyone has any other final questions, or if Doug or Lisa, if you've got any final comments to make, please do.
This is Doug. I'd just like to say thanks for having me today, and I put my email out there. Anybody has any questions, let me know. Be happy to do what I can.
Okay, we've got a couple coming in, so we'll wait for those. Okay, otherwise, if I think that probably ends the session today. Go ahead and we'll leave the poll up here for a few more minutes so people can complete that before they log off. We will be sending out information, or KEB, as they've been assisting with this process all along. We'll send out an email in the next few days identifying next week's topic. And if we have additional weeks beyond that, we'll identify those so you can plan and identify the staff that you would like to participate in these. One thing I do want to add is we've had a lot of requests on an individual basis from staff, whether they can be added to the, the email distribution list. Our list right now is up to about 150 people. That does include some of our own staff, but I don't know if from an administrative level, the local areas, if they want every single person put on that. What I'd ask is, we have added some of those. If you, at that level, do not wish to have your staff added to the list, please let us know, and we'll assume that you will then share the email that comes to you directly, and we will make sure that those don't get on there on an individual basis. Otherwise, as those requests come in, we will just add those to the email list until, I guess, we max out. I don't know what the maximum is for an email, but like I said, we're up to about 150 with a few requests today. As we add agency partners to these discussions, we're going to have more requests. So, if you've got a suggestion for your staff, send that to me. I'll type my email in. Most of you have that email address, but for those that might not, or if you would like to be added to the list, otherwise, email those requests to me, and I'll make sure the names get added to that list.
We might want to look at working with Jeannie, too, about getting a larger list.
Okay, yeah, Lisa's saying it in the background. We could maybe work with the Illinois WorkNet staff in getting a distribution list that way so that it can be made through the checkbox. If you're a professional on Illinois WorkNet, she sends out information on a regular basis. Maybe we can go that route and everyone can get it without having to necessarily request. All they'd have to do is sign up for that request for information for webinars, and they'll get it that way. So again, thanks to everyone. Doug, thank you very much for participating and presenting today. It's very good information. I think people have been thankful to get this type of webinar finally. Lisa, for your assistance as well. And we will see everyone next week. Thank you.